The prairie was silent that night, the kind of silence that presses against a person's chest until it feels like they can't breathe. The stars hung cold over the dry fields, and the wooden frame of an old barn creaked against the steady push of the wind. Inside, in the dark corners where hay rotted and dust clung to the beams, a woman lay broken. Her name was Clara Whitmore, though her in-laws rarely used her name anymore. To them, she was a burden, a reminder of a son they had lost and a marriage they never approved of. They had locked her there after supper, the way they had for weeks. A rusted iron chain fastened the barn doors from the outside, the sound of it rattling each time she dared to pull. Her wrists carried the marks of rope burns. Her face was bruised and swollen from the backhand of a man who claimed to be family. The farm was theirs, and she was treated as little more than livestock. Clara remembered the night her husband died. He had been a quiet man, a soldier returned from the war with shadows in his eyes but kindness still in his hands. They had married quickly, and he had brought her here to the family farm, promising it would be their new beginning. But when a fever carried him to the grave not even a year later, the warmth left with him. His parents turned cold. His brother turned cruel. The barn was her prison. They beat her when she refused to work from sunrise to dusk, beat her when she spoke out of turn, and sometimes beat her simply because there was nothing else left to break on that desolate farm. Clara had once prayed, had once begged God for mercy, but mercy had not come. Now her prayers had turned into muffled sobs, whispered into the hay as the night air froze around her. She pressed her cheek against the rough wood of the barn wall, straining to hear anything beyond the wind. Sometimes she caught the distant hoot of an owl, sometimes the restless stamp of a horse in the paddock. Tonight, though, there was something different. The faint, hollow sound of hoofbeats far down the dirt road. Slow, deliberate. Someone was passing by. Clara's chest tightened. She hesitated, then let out a broken cry, the kind that tore from the throat of someone who had been silent too long. Her voice cracked against the night, weak and desperate. She screamed again, her fists pounding against the wooden boards until her knuckles bled. On the other side of the fields, a man named Ethan Cole reined in his horse. He was a rancher, one who lived alone on a stretch of land no one else wanted, too dry for crops, too lonely for families. He was a man haunted by his own past, by choices he could never undo. But tonight his ears caught something he could not ignore. He tilted his head, listening to the wind. It was faint, nearly carried off by the emptiness of the plains, but it was there, a woman's cry. Not just a sound, but a plea. Ethan dismounted, his boots sinking into the dirt. He stood still for a moment, listening again, before leading his horse toward the sound. His hand rested on the worn grip of his revolver, though he did not yet know why. Clara's cries grew hoarser, weaker. Her hands trembled as she struck the boards again, whispering to herself that no one would hear, that no one ever heard. Yet in the silence after her last scream, she thought she heard something new, the crunch of footsteps outside, the creak of leather, the steady breathing of a man. Her heart froze. And then a voice, low and rough, came from the darkness outside the barn. "Who's in there?" The sound of it cut through her despair like the first crack of dawn. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Clara felt something stir in her chest that she thought had died long ago. Hope. Ethan Cole stood in the dirt yard of the Whitmore farm, his silhouette cut sharp by the lantern glow spilling faintly from the farmhouse windows across the field. His eyes lingered on the barn, old, weather-worn, the kind of place where a man stored grain, tools, maybe a cow or two. But no man should ever hear a woman's cries clawing through its cracks. He stepped closer, his spurs clinking softly. Inside, Clara shrank back at first, her battered frame trembling in the corner of the barn. For weeks, the only footsteps outside meant pain, the only voices meant cruelty. But this one was different. It wasn't drunk with rage, or sharp with disdain. It was steady, cautious. A man who wanted answers. Her voice cracked as she whispered back, "Please, help me." Ethan pressed a calloused hand against the barn door. He tugged on the handle, only to feel the resistance of the iron chain locking it from the outside. His jaw tightened. Whoever lived here had locked her in like a wild animal, "What's your name?" he asked through the boards, his voice low but firm. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Whitmore." Ethan froze. He knew the Whitmores. Everyone in the county did. A family that worked the land with an iron fist who believed in order, discipline, and the cruelest kind of justice. Rumors had spread about how they treated outsiders, and worse, how they treated their own. But rumors didn't matter now. He had heard the truth with his own ears. "Hold on, Clara," Ethan muttered, already reaching for the revolver at his hip. With the butt of the gun, he struck the chain. Once, twice. On the third strike, the rusted links snapped, and the doors shuddered open with a long groan. The lantern he carried revealed her. A woman pale with exhaustion. Bruises etched deep into her skin, her hair tangled and matted. She recoiled from the light, shielding her face as if it might burn her. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. He had seen war. He had seen men broken on battlefields. But there was something worse about this. A woman beaten in her own home by those who should have protected her. Clara's eyes darted to him, unsure whether to trust. She had been betrayed by family. What could she expect from a stranger? But there was no malice in his gaze, no hunger for power. Only concern, raw and unpolished. Before she could speak again, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the farmhouse. Ethan turned sharply, his lantern extinguished with a flick of his fingers. Shadows swallowed them both, save for the faint glimmer of moonlight slipping through the barn cracks. 3 figures emerged across the yard, 2 men and a woman. Clara knew them well. The older one was Samuel Whitmore, her husband's father, a man with hands like stone and a heart to match. Beside him walked Thomas, her brother-in-law, the one who struck her most often, his steps heavy with arrogance. And behind them, Martha Whitmore, the matriarch whose tongue lashed sharper than any whip. Ethan's hand tightened on his revolver, though he kept it low by his side. He wasn't here to draw blood. "Not yet," Samuel's voice broke the night. "Thought I heard something out here," he muttered, squinting at the barn. "Chains broke." Clara's breath caught in her throat. If they found Ethan, they'd kill him. She knew it. These were not people who tolerated trespassers, and a man caught meddling with their family business would be buried out in the field before dawn. Ethan crouched low, his whisper brushing her ear. "Stay quiet." He moved like a ghost, pressing himself against the wall of the barn, revolver ready. The Whitmores stepped closer, their lanterns slicing through the darkness, casting long, cruel shadows. Martha spat in the dirt. "That girl's getting louder every night." "I told you, Samuel. Locking her in the barn ain't shut her mouth," Thomas chuckled, mean and hollow. "Don't matter. She won't last long. Ain't got the stomach for this life." Clara bit her lip until it bled, her eyes brimming with silent rage. They spoke about her as though she weren't flesh and blood, but cattle destined for slaughter. Ethan had heard enough. He wasn't a lawman, wasn't a preacher, but something inside him, the last fragment of honor he carried, rose up like a storm. He stepped from the shadows, his revolver gleaming faint under the moonlight. "Seems to me," Ethan drawled, his voice cutting cold across the yard. "That barn's holding the wrong kind of stock." The Whitmores froze. Lantern light catching the outline of the stranger. Thomas sneered. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way he stood, calm but ready, spoke louder than words. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "You best mind your own business, cowboy." "Ain't no call for you to be here." Ethan took one step forward, the boards of the barn groaning under his boots. "There's always a call," he said, "when a woman screams loud enough to wake the dead." Clara's heart thundered. For the first time since her husband's death, someone stood between her and the Whitmores. Someone unafraid. The silence stretched, thick as the night air. The Whitmores' hands hovered near the weapons at their belts. Ethan's finger grazed the trigger of his Colt. The tension coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike, and Clara knew this night would decide everything. Right now, only 0.5% of the people who watch these stories are subscribed. If you enjoy them, hit that subscribe button and help us grow this channel together. The wind cut across the yard, rattling the loose boards of the farmhouse porch. Dust swirled low around the Whitmores' boots as they stared at Ethan Cole, an uninvited shadow standing tall between them and the barn where they had locked Clara. No one moved at first. The only sounds were the horses shifting in their pens and the faint whimper of Clara from inside. The lantern light flickered, casting every wrinkle of Samuel Whitmore's hardened face into sharp relief. His eyes narrowed like a man who had been challenged in his own kingdom, and he didn't take kindly to strangers stepping across his dirt. "You've got no business here," Samuel growled. "This is family matter," Ethan's jaw flexed. He had heard those words before, in mining camps, in border towns, in alleys where women bled while men looked the other way. Family matter was nothing but a cloak for cruelty. He spoke slowly, so each word cut deep. "Where I come from, family don't chain their own blood like a dog. Family don't raise fists till there's nothing left but bones." Thomas spat in the dirt, his hand twitching near the revolver at his hip. "You talk too much for a man standing alone." Ethan's eyes flicked to him, calm as a storm cloud before lightning. "Alone's all I need," the standoff stretched. Clara pressed herself against the inside of the barn door, every muscle trembling. She wanted to scream, to beg Ethan to leave before the Whitmores tore him down. But something stopped her. A fragile spark had lit inside her chest. For the first time in so long, she felt the stir of defiance. Martha Whitmore stepped forward then, her face pale and sharp under the moonlight. "She's worthless," she hissed. "We took her in when she had no one. Fed her, housed her, and this is how she repays us, crying, complaining, refusing to do her duty." Her words slashed Clara's ears, the same venom she'd swallowed night after night. But Ethan only shook his head. "You didn't take her in," he said. His voice was low, steady. "You buried her alive." Samuel's patience snapped. His hand shot to his belt, pulling free a long, rusted shotgun that gleamed under the lantern light. "One more word out of you, stranger, and they'll be picking your bones out of this dirt." The shotgun leveled at Ethan's chest. Clara gasped, pressing her palms against the boards. Her whisper barely escaped her lips. "Please, don't—" But Ethan didn't flinch. He'd faced rifles before, on battlefields soaked in blood. He had seen the barrel of death, and yet here, something in him stood unshaken. Maybe it was the memory of screams he hadn't answered years ago. Maybe it was the thought of riding home and hearing her cries in his head for the rest of his life. Whatever it was, he held his ground. "Go ahead," Ethan muttered. "Pull that trigger. But know this. The law don't look kindly on men who bury women in barns. And I won't be the only one who heard her tonight, a lie. He was the only one who had ridden that road." But the Whitmores didn't know that. Samuel's eyes twitched, doubt creeping into the cracks of his fury. Thomas, however, wasn't a man for patience. With a curse, he drew his revolver, stepping forward with a sneer. "I'll shut him up right now." The crack of a gunshot split the night. Clara screamed, ducking as the barn wall shook with the force. For a heartbeat, she thought Ethan had been hit. But when she dared to peek through the gap in the boards, she saw Thomas clutching his hand, his revolver clattering into the dirt. Ethan's Colt smoked faintly at his side. "I don't miss," Ethan said coldly. Thomas staggered back, cursing as blood dripped from his hand. Martha shrieked, rushing to him, but Samuel raised the shotgun higher, his face red with rage. "You'll pay for that, rancher!" Samuel roared. "Ain't no man crosses a Whitmore and lives." He cocked the shotgun. Ethan's eyes narrowed, calculating. He could take Samuel down, maybe both men, but Clara was trapped behind him. If the fight turned ugly, she'd be caught in the crossfire. He needed a way to get her free. "Clara," Ethan called, his voice hard but steady. "Can you move?" Her breath caught. No one had spoken her name like that in months. Like she was human, not cattle. She swallowed hard. "Yes." "Then when I say run," Ethan murmured, never breaking eye contact with Samuel, "you run." The shotgun barrel gleamed, rising level with Ethan's heart. Time slowed. Clara felt her pulse hammer against her ribs, her nails digging into the barn door until splinters cut her skin. Then Ethan moved. His revolver barked once, shattering the lantern Samuel carried. Darkness swallowed the yard in an instant, smoke and fire raining sparks across the dirt. The shotgun blast roared wide, pellets tearing through the barn wall inches from Clara's head. She dropped to the floor with a cry. "Run!" Ethan shouted. Clara shoved against the barn doors, her bruised muscles screaming. The gap split wider, and she stumbled out into the chaos, into the night air, her bare feet hitting the dirt for the first time in weeks. Thomas, bleeding but furious, lunged for her. His good hand reached out, snarling, "You ain't going anywhere." But Ethan's boot caught him square in the chest, sending him sprawling into the dust. The revolver snapped up again, covering Samuel before the old man could reload. Clara froze in the yard, her breath ragged. The night around her smelled of smoke, gunpowder, and freedom, a scent she thought she'd never breathe again. Ethan stepped to her side, his voice low. "Stay behind me." The Whitmores seethed in the dark, their hate burning hotter than the moon above. But Clara wasn't the same woman they had locked in that barn. Something inside her had broken free with those chains, something they couldn't put back. And though she didn't yet know it, this night would mark the beginning of her vengeance. The gunpowder haze lingered in the yard like a ghost. Smoke curled from the broken lantern glass at Samuel's feet, sparks flickering out in the dirt. The Whitmores shouted in the dark, scrambling to reload, but Ethan had no intention of staying for another round. He grabbed Clara's arm, rough but protective, pulling her close. "Move," he ordered. Her legs wobbled beneath her, thin from weeks of half-starved meals and long days of forced labor. But fear drove her faster than her body should have allowed. Together they ran across the open yard, Ethan's revolver raised behind them, his eyes scanning every shadow. Shots rang out. Samuel's shotgun booming into the night, Thomas firing wildly despite his bleeding hand. Pellets and bullets tore. Into the barn, shattered fence posts, whistled past Clara's ear. She stumbled, but Ethan's hand steadied her, dragging her toward the waiting horse tethered at the edge of the road. Clara had never ridden at full gallop before. She barely knew how to keep herself in a saddle. But there was no time for hesitation. Ethan swung up first, then pulled her up before him with a strength that made her gasp. "Hold tight!" he barked, spurring the horse hard. The animal lunged forward, hooves pounding against the dirt road as the wind tore at Clara's hair. Behind them, the Whitmores shouted curses, their figures shrinking in the dark, gunfire cracking uselessly into the distance. The rancher didn't look back. He bent low over the reins, every muscle taut. Clara clung to him, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, her heart hammering against his back. For the first time in months, the chains weren't on her wrists. They were broken and left behind in that cursed barn. They rode for miles, the night pressing colder with every hoofbeat. The prairie stretched endless, a black ocean broken only by the pale shimmer of starlight. Clara's body trembled, not just from exhaustion, but from the storm that raged inside her. She whispered against Ethan's coat, her voice hoarse. "They'll come for us." Ethan didn't turn. His eyes stayed fixed on the trail. Let him try. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the rhythm of hooves. Clara thought of the barn, of the blows, of the words that had cut her deeper than fists. The rage burned hot, but beneath it sat something heavier, the memory of her husband. The man who had promised her a life, only for death to hand her over to wolves in his absence. She had loved him, yet now his family's cruelty had nearly destroyed her. She clenched her fists in Ethan's coat. "I should have fought harder." Ethan finally glanced down at her, his profile lit faint by the stars. "Fightin' ain't easy when you're chained." Clara shook her head, bitterness rising. "But I let them do it. I let them beat me, cage me like an animal. I was too weak." The rancher's voice turned hard. "No, weak would have been given up. You survived." Those words pierced deeper than any sermon she had ever heard. She swallowed, her throat thick with unshed tears. For weeks, she had thought of herself as nothing but a shadow, a broken thing. But Ethan's words lit something fragile inside her, the faintest ember of worth. By dawn, they reached Ethan's land. His ranch sat quiet in the pale morning glow, a lonely cabin with a corral and wide stretches of dry earth. Not much, but it was his, built with his own two hands. Ethan dismounted, steadying Clara as she slid down. Her knees buckled, but he caught her, his grip firm yet gentle. He led her inside, where the cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, where no chains rattled, no cruel eyes watched. Clara sank into a chair by the hearth, her eyes scanning the simple room. A table scarred by years of use, a shelf with a Bible, a knife, and a tin of tobacco, a single bed neatly made. It was the home of a man who lived alone, untouched by family quarrels or the weight of expectation. Ethan poured her water, pressing the cup into her trembling hands. She drank greedily, the cool liquid spilling down her chin, but she didn't care. For once, there was no one to slap the cup away. She whispered, "Why did you stop? Why did you help me?" Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his hat shadowing his face. He thought of the past, of screams he hadn't answered years ago, of a girl in a mining camp whose cries were silenced forever because he'd ridden past. His jaw clenched. "Because I heard you," he said simply. "And I couldn't ride on." Clara stared into the fire. His words settled into her bones, heavy but warm. Days passed. She slept. She healed. Her bruises faded from purple to yellow, her cuts closed. She began to walk outside, into the sharp morning air, into the fields where silence didn't mean punishment. She fed his horses, gathered water, let her hands relearn what freedom felt like. But every night, she woke from dreams of fists, of chains, of Samuel's voice calling her worthless. And each time, Ethan was there, a steady shadow by the door. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. He only watched, silent, as though guarding her from ghosts. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the plains, Clara stood with him by the corral. She gripped the fence rail, her nails digging into the wood. "They won't stop," she said softly. "The Whitmores. They'll come for me. For us." Ethan's gaze hardened. "Then we'll be ready." Clara turned to him, her eyes blazing for the first time. "No, I don't just want to be ready. I want them to pay." The rancher studied her, the flicker of fire returning to her eyes. She wasn't the broken woman he had found in that barn. Not anymore. "You sure about that?" he asked, his voice grave. "Vengeance changes folks." Clara straightened her shoulders, the prairie wind tugging at her hair. "They already changed me. Now it's my turn." In the fading light, Ethan saw the truth. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was the birth of something far more dangerous. The woman the Whitmores had beaten and caged was gone. In her place stood someone forged by cruelty, sharpened by pain, someone ready to reclaim her name, someone ready to make the Whitmores bleed. The sun rose heavy and red that morning, as though the sky itself bled for what was coming. The prairie wind carried the faint scent of dust and rain, but beneath it, Clara felt something else, the sharp tang of fate. For days she had rebuilt herself under Ethan's roof. Her bruises had faded, her strength returned, but her rage only grew. Every scar on her skin whispered the same truth. The Whitmores would never stop hunting her. Not until she was back in chains. Not until she was dead, and Clara Whitmore was not ready to die. It started with the sound of hooves. Heavy, deliberate, too many for simple riders. Ethan was at the corral, fixing a fence post, when his head snapped up. Dust plumed on the horizon, riders approaching fast. He dropped the hammer, his hand instinctively reaching for his Colt. "They're here." Clara stepped out onto the porch, her hair loose in the wind, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the riders cutting across the land. 6 of them. Samuel, Thomas with his bandaged hand, Martha, and 3 hired men carrying rifles. Her stomach twisted, but fear no longer ruled her. Instead, a cold calm settled over her. She had prayed once for deliverance. Now she prayed only for justice. "Get inside," Ethan said, steadying his revolver. But Clara shook her head. Her voice was low, steady. "No, this is my fight." The Whitmores reined in just yards from the cabin. Samuel sat tall in the saddle, the shotgun laid across his lap like a king holding court. His face was carved with fury, his voice booming across the yard. "You think you can steal what's ours?" He roared, "That woman belongs to this family." Clara's laugh was sharp, bitter. She stepped down from the porch, her bare feet brushing the dust. "I was never yours. I was your prisoner, Martha spat, her words venom. You ungrateful wretch! We gave you food, shelter, and you repay us with betrayal? Clara's eyes blazed. You gave me chains. You gave me bruises. And tonight, I give them back. The hired guns shifted, uncertain. They hadn't expected a woman's voice to cut like steel. But Samuel barked, enough talk. Take her! The riders moved, rifles raised. Ethan fired first. His colt barked, dropping one man clean from his saddle. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed. Gunfire cracked. Dust rose like a storm. Clara darted for the rifle propped against the porch, the wood cold in her hands. Thomas charged at her, fury in his eyes. You'll die screaming, girl. But Clara was faster. Weeks of helplessness had built into one sharp moment. She leveled the rifle, her finger trembling only for a second before she pulled the trigger. The shot rang true. Thomas staggered, the bullet slamming into his chest. He fell to the dirt, gasping, his hands clawing the air before falling still. Clara's breath came ragged. Her arms shook, but she did not lower the rifle. Martha shrieked, her scream piercing the chaos. Murderess! But Clara only shouted back, her voice raw. No, survivor! Ethan fought like a man possessed, his revolver a blur, dropping another hired gun with a precise shot to the throat. But Samuel was still there, roaring with rage, the shotgun in his grip, booming. Pellets tore into the cabin walls, shattering glass, sending splinters flying. Clara ducked, rolling behind the corral fence. Her chest heaved, her ears ringing. The memory of chains clamped at her ribs, but she shoved it down. This was not the barn. She was not caged. She was free, and freedom demanded blood. Samuel dismounted, striding through the dust with the shotgun cocked. His eyes locked on Clara. You think you can kill a Whitmore? He snarled. We built this land. We bury cowards like you in it. Clara rose from behind the fence, the rifle steady against her shoulder. Her voice shook with fury. You buried my husband. You buried me. But you'll bury no one else. Samuel raised the shotgun. Clara fired. The bullet struck him square in the chest. He stumbled, dropped to his knees, the shotgun clattering from his hands. His mouth opened, but no words came, only blood. Then he toppled into the dirt, lifeless. Silence fell heavy. The last hired gun fled, his horse kicking up dust as he vanished into the horizon. Only Martha remained. She stood frozen, her dress torn, her eyes wide with shock. She stared at Clara as though seeing her for the first time, not as a beaten widow, but as an avenger risen from the grave. You, Martha whispered. You devil! Clara stepped closer, the rifle still smoking in her hands. Her voice was low, trembling with finality. No, you made me. Martha's knees buckled. She collapsed into the dirt beside her dead husband and son, her cries ragged and empty. Clara looked down at her, but there was no pity left. Some wounds could never be forgiven. Ethan touched Clara's shoulder, grounding her. She turned to him, her face streaked with sweat and tears, but her eyes unbroken. It's over, he said softly. Clara shook her head, staring at the horizon where the sun burned crimson. No, it's only beginning. I have a life to live now. My own life. That night the prairie was quiet again. But this time it was not the silence of despair. It was the silence after a storm, the silence of freedom hard won. Clara Whitmore stood in the doorway of Ethan's cabin, the stars above her, the wind on her face. She was no longer the woman locked in a barn. She was fire, she was storm, she was reborn in the blood of those who had tried to break her. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one truth rang clear in her heart. No chain would ever bind her again.